Hi, I'm Julie Costello, and I'm doing my opener on Brigham City, which was directed by Richard Dutcher. So, this film was a murder mystery. It's set in a small town, and it's about a sheriff who's also a bishop that's trying to deal with a serial killer, which was kind of unknown to the town where they had had no murders beforehand. Um, and it kind of shows the effects of the murders on the community and how they affected the families involved, the ward members involved, and how the church community rose up to help, and also how it made them feel not as safe as they did before. And it kind of shows his Wes, the main character, his struggle of trying to balance his role as bishop and as sheriff. So my connection is on the history of church leaders as political leaders, and I focused on Brigham Young specifically, which I thought was interesting because the film is set in Brigham City, but he was governor of Utah when it first became a territory, and he had some issues as being a political leader, but also a church leader. So there were some role issues there, and he had issues with non LDS individuals and politics. So that kind of led to some in group and out group problems. And this was similar to the film as Wes being sheriff, which was a position of power in the community, as well as bishop, which is a church leadership position. And this dual role led to issues of in group and out group of the community, as well as role balancing issues. So, the first role balancing issue that is shown is when a woman comes in for a confession when he's working as sheriff. So she comes into the sheriff's office, and he says that he's really uncomfortable acting as bishop while being sheriff, but she says that it can't wait. And this issue of being acting as sheriff and bishop at the same time is prevalent when she says, "I've never had to confess my sins to a man wearing a gun before." And he has to take off his gun and put it away in his desk for her meeting with him. And some of the mise en scène in this sequence kind of helps illustrate that shift and kind of struggle within him as going from sheriff to bishop. And his posture, I think, helps demonstrate that, where he is leaning back at first, kind of more open when he is speaking to her as sheriff, and then as soon as she says that she wants to talk to him as bishop, he leans forward and clasps his hands together like a bishop waiting to hear and waiting to be able to help her in any way that he can. Another role balancing issue he has is when he catches a man with his porn collection when he's acting as sheriff trying to find a missing girl, and he's doing a search of his home. And this leads to an issue of sheriff and bishop because he's acting as sheriff and trying to help, and it's awkward for the man involved because the sheriff found something that could lead to like a bishop issue and tells him that he like meant to confess and come to him about it. And this upsets Wes, where he finally says, "Don't call me bishop. Right now I have to care about the people in this town a lot more than I care about you." And so that's another instance where he's trying to separate that role as sheriff from his role as bishop. And the mise en scène in this, when he first opens up the closet, everything is super organized and in order and looks normal. And then he finds this hidden stash of pornography, and it's kind of a little bit more messy. The tapes are not put all the way like in line, and there's pictures that are kind of scattered on the other side of the door, which I think is kind of symbolic of people that have their lives all together and in order to the public, and maybe like when they go to church they have everything in order and their life together, but then they always have their skeletons hidden in the closet where they might have their more the messier sides of themselves, which the bishop usually finds out, which is funny because Wes, his bishop, is the one that found this hidden skeleton in his closet. So another in-group, or so another part of the connection that I kind of talked about with Brigham Young having that dual role of power was the in-group and out-group issue. And so one of the in-group and out-group issue was with town outsiders, and Wes made it apparent that he didn't really trust the outsiders of the town when he came to this man who employed people from out of town first, trying to find any suspects, thinking that no one from his town, from his in-group, could be a killer. So he immediately looked to the out-group for this. And when he couldn't find answers here, he then went to the bar, which was kind of symbolic of faith outsiders. And it was like the thought process there was no one from my in-group of church community could have done this thing. So let's look to the out-group of people at the bar who obviously would be criminals. And a formal element that I'd like to discuss in this scene is the lighting. The lighting in this is pretty dark and dim, and this kind of helps set the tone for how they're viewing people at the bar as more like dark and mysterious, as opposed to the scenes filmed in the church, which are always super brightly and evenly lit. Like kind of showing like you see everything that's there with the church people, but you may not see everything that's there with people at the bar. And then another in-group or out-group example is with Terry, who seemed to be part of the in-group, which led to some blindness of his criminal tendencies that were there under the surface, because he was part of the in-group. He was a member of the town, part of the sheriff's inner circle, worked with him, and he was also a returned missionary, which made him not seem like a suspect at all when he came in, and the sheriff just gave him the job right away, but he actually ended up being the killer. And speaking of Terry, I'd like to add another connection with Arthur Gary Bishop. He is a serial killer in Utah, and he kind of had a similar background as Terry because he was an Eagle Scout, a returned missionary. So he seems like he's trustworthy and part of this in-group, but then he ended up being a serial killer and killed young boys, which kind of shows that just because someone's part of your in-group or your faith, you never know like what's going on beneath the surface. And so my questions are: one, how do you think the director's LDS background influenced the portrayal of violence in the film? And two, do you think the sheriff's utilization of his role as bishop to progress the search for the killer and missing girl was out of line? And that's all. Here's my sources if you guys are curious where I got any of my information. But yep, that's all from me. Thank you.